Welcome to Public Safety Talk Radio, the podcast for all of our heroes of public safety, including law enforcement professionals, firefighters, EMTs, corrections officers, healthcare workers, and more. The show is produced by the POCUA and is founded upon its Soundness Initiative. This episode is sponsored by the Finest Service Organization, a provider of line of duty death loan protection through many of our POCUA institutions. Welcome to part 2 of victim-centered methodology. Well, you're not a cop, but you're an inventor, and I really want to dig into these methodologies. You have invented a victim-centered death investigation methodology
Called the
as
murder
well,
room. Yep.
as well as a murder room methodology. So tell us more about that.
So my grandfather was an inventor. He holds several patents on making bricks. My family was in the brick business up in Pennsylvania in the early 1900s. And I just sort of followed in his footsteps because my dad used to give me piles of junk is the best way of describing it. like a
Make
straw.
something out of this.
Yes, that's exactly right. A piece of string, a piece of plastic, a piece of wood, a fan blade, and like a strainer or something, like crazy things.
Sounds like an inventor version of Chopped, but go ahead.
Yeah, he was like, now do something with this, make it into something, do something, make this, do something. And so I always wanted to catch stuff in the creek. I was wanting to catch salamanders and crawfish, the little things that look like little lobsters.
I've been in New Orleans before, I'm aware.
But this is in Pennsylvania, so
Yeah.
I don't know what they're really called there.
Yeah.
But anyway, they're the ones with the little claws. And, I would always want to catch those. And they always, they swim backwards. So that was always a challenge to create something that would, catch them like that. So I grew up like as a complete gigantic nerd, which of course, there's nothing different now. I'm still a giant nerd. But like I learned from my dad just to always problem solve and try to build something out of nothing and to improvise when something didn't exist, invent it. It wasn't like, oh, well, we can't do that. That doesn't exist. Okay, well, if it doesn't exist, we need to build it. And so that was kind of the mentality, I grew up with. My dad was not an inventor. He was a banker. I mean, it was totally different than my grandfather. And I never knew my grandfather, but he would tell me all these things about him. So my dad kind of had this master plan. So that's how I ended up becoming an inventor. The first thing I invented in the law enforcement community was the kaleidoscope system. It is it's been around a long time now. It's been around since 2009. Came up with it in 2008. It was known as under a different name back then. And then in 2013, I reinvented the whole thing and invented all these new pieces basically. And it became the kaleidoscope system. And it reconstructs shooting trajectories and bloodstain trajectories at the same time using all lasers. So it gets rid of all the droopy strings and all of the, a lot less margin of error. And it's a manual system that people can learn to use in the field that's very easy and effective, yet economical, as opposed to like a scanner type system that, measures millions of points and cost you thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars. A lot of agencies can't afford stuff like that. Exactly. So the kaleidoscope system is a great alternative to those fancy systems. And before, we didn't have the fancy systems when I invented that. So that was my first invention. It's sold around the world, 30 countries or so by 11 distributors. And then I invented victim-centered death investigation methodology, which is a scientific multidisciplinary methodology that turned into the murder room. So first there was this death investigation methodology that basically not only identified all the information, but then organized all the information, sorted, organized, categorized. Then after all that was done, then it broke it into groups and began to analyze it. And then eventually you would get to like a manner of death at the end. As time went on, and after I wrote the book, after I got out of PhD school and my dissertation was crime scene behaviors of crime scene stagers, third dissertation in the world on staging. And then when I wrote the book, Crime Scene Staging Dynamics and Homicide Cases, that book is the very first book in the world on staging, on crime scenes that are staged in homicide cases. So it's basically propelled me into this space of inventing tools for law enforcement that were super easy to use, super field friendly, fast, and free, that they could remember very easily, like Pettler's Trilogy. Pettler's Trilogy is staging trilogy, 3 points. When you pull up to the scene, you ask, who is in conflict with this victim? That's the first thing you need to know if you've got an unexpected death that's called in as anything. I don't care if it's a homicide, suicide, whatever manner of death they're calling in, or an accident, or an injured person, missing person. First thing you need to know is there's someone conflict with that victim. The second thing you need to know is who discovered that victim. And the third thing you need to know before you do anything else is who called 911 and what did they say on that 911 call. And those are the three primary things. If you are answering, John Doe, and John Doe for all three of those answers, who's in conflict, who discovered the victim, and who called 911, you should proceed with caution and raise the red flag that you could have, not that you do have, you might, you could, maybe have a staged homicide, because there's preceding conflict found in 100% of all staged homicide cases internationally that have ever been studied. So preceding conflict is the foundation of all of that. So then, you take that kind of a tool and then expand on that, into victim-centered death investigation methodology, which then expanded into the murder room. The murder room is, of everything I've ever done, I really am grateful to have thought of the murder room, because it not only helps get justice for victims, it helps get answers for families, and it helps law enforcement, it helps prosecutors. It's a round table of experts sitting in a giant room with a giant lazy Susan in the middle. And from crime scene to courtroom, everybody puts up their evidence on the lazy Susan. And at the end, you've got a case. And on the probable cause wall, when we start the murder room process, the probable cause wall is empty. And at the end of the process, end of stage 6, it's a 6-stage quantitative and qualitative scientific multidisciplinary process. When you are finished, if it is a murder case and it is a manner of death homicide and criminal act of murder, which are two totally different things. Homicide means one human killed another human. It's a medical term.
Right.
Murder, manslaughter, those are criminal terms, legal terms. So you can have a homicide, but it's not a murder. Right?
Correct.
So at the end, you'll have a probable cause wall full of probable cause items, of which then the prosecutorial team and the jurisdictional agency can then decide, do we have enough for an arrest? Yep, we do. Do we have enough to prosecute? You know what? We need to go a little further. Or, yep, we do. Let's go make the arrest. So the murder room resolves manner of death in almost every case that's ever been through it. It can help you develop prosecutorial strategy. It can also show you people that are innocent and don't belong involved in the situation. It sequesters all of the white noise and all of the muddy water. All that gets put on one wall and out and set away from all of the critical evidence, so that investigators can focus on the critical evidence. Because 9 times out of 10, when a case comes to LPA to get put in the murder room, it's A, suspect-centered instead of victim-centered, and B, it is a case that requires a different organizational system
Now a word from our sponsor, the Police Officers Credit Union Association. Coming this October 2021 is the Public Safety Business Summit in Savannah, Georgia, a program specifically created for organizations that serve first responders. What you will experience is a high level of networking and collaboration among like-minded leaders who are in the business of serving first responders. What you won't get are a series of boring lectures with no interactivity, ridiculous golf outings that are only appealing to a few attendees, or a couple of retreaded subjects that you can hear at any credit union league event that are just thrown into the curriculum. We offer an engaging agenda where attendees even help to determine the content during the actual conference based on their unique needs. If you run a business, a credit union, or a nonprofit that specifically serves first responders, then the Public Safety Business Summit is for you. For more information, go to www.policecreditunions.com or call 331-300-9889. We hope to see you in Savannah this fall.
Oh, I always say that, why don't you try the other smoking gun, which is victimology. You know, victimology is the smoking gun. It really, in a lot of cases, almost all homicide cases, tells you why the victim's dead. So if you know why the victim's dead, then you know maybe who killed the victim or who wanted the victim killed. There's something we use here called the Conflict Resolution Benefit Matrix. It's a phenomenal tool. It is part of the murder room, and it has 3 columns. And when you use the CRB, basically you identify all of the preceding conflict between a victim and whoever. So if you have 5 suspects, you should run 5 CRBs, 1 CRB for each suspect. And here's why. The CRB, say that you circle who's in conflict with this victim. What's the conflict? Divorce, breakup, affair, child support, child custody, unwanted pregnancy, debt, you know, any of those kind of things, or sometimes all of them, you know, I mean, in a lot of cases. And then it culminates into an argument, right? And they have this end up this big blowout. Well, an argument is, of course, verbally 2 people, or, you know, in written linguistically arguing over something. And then some people choose murder to resolve the conflict.
I've heard that. Yeah.
Yeah. Some people choose talking.
Yeah.
And then some people choose murder. Murder is conflict resolution for certain types of offenders, like, you know, people that are arguing. And in that frame of using murder as a resolution, when you look back at what happened right before the murder, you know, in the 30 days prior, typically sometimes 90 days prior, you know, you go out, we do all these macro timelines all the way down to micro, and then sub micro and micro timelines that are, you know, by the minute, all the way up to the milestones the past 6 months, you know, macro to micro on everything. So in the resolution column of the CRB, you've identified all of the conflict in the first column. In the second column, you're identifying that murder was used as the resolution tool. So is it reflective of anger? Is it reflective of power? I mean, what's it reflective of? And it will be reflective of what you are seeing in column 1. And the personality and cognition and behavior and emotionality, all of that will be reflected in that murder. And then in column 3, you ask, who benefits from the death of this victim? Well, it's pretty obvious who benefits from the death of this victim. Well, then how do they benefit from the death of the victim? So if you circled debt, and you circled divorce, and you circled breakup and child support and child custody, and you moved all that to column 3 and say, how does this suspect that we're running through here benefit from the death of this victim? Is the divorce issue resolved? Yeah, there's no more costly divorce. Is the child custody issue resolved? Yeah, there's not another parent to share custody with. Is the child support issue resolved? Yeah, sure is, because there's nobody to pay, or there's nobody that has to be paid. And it goes on and on and on. Once you have a CRB run for every suspect you have in a case, you will have this shining star suspect who comes out very, very, shines brightly in the benefit column. And you want to pay more attention to that one. Yeah. If you have, other suspects that aren't benefiting from the victim's death, murder doesn't happen in a vacuum. So why would they kill them? You know what I mean? Yeah. That's it's a problem. So the murder room gets us to a lot of answers, and it's primarily an organizational system first, and then it is an analytical system second. Then it synthesizes everything, and then it evaluates all the critical evidence in totality for prosecutors and investigators and people in charge to make decisions.
Very, very interesting.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's in hearing you explain the methodology, unless somebody is a psychopath, there's got to be some type of benefit, unless the reason is just, hey, I enjoy killing people.
well, psychopaths definitely benefit from murder in lots of different ways. Sometimes it just can be the satisfaction of anger. Yeah. Sometimes it can be the satisfaction of power and control over a victim. Like in domestic violence homicide, it's always power and control centered. And then sometimes you have anger, and sometimes you don't have anger present. But it's the psychopathy of people think that mental illness correlates very strongly with homicide, and that's actually not true. Statistically, there's fewer people that are mentally ill that cause harm to others. They more cause harm to themselves than they do to others. From a homicide standpoint, of course, there's ancillary issues that people have with people that substance abuse or whatever it is, but in general, there's just not a high rate of, mentally ill people, like by the stigma of what mental illness means in this country, committing as many homicides as people think. It's typically anger, and that's the number one emotion that's always, not always, but a lot of times seen in homicide. And it's argument conflict based, and it's between two people that know each other. Statistically, we have very few stranger on stranger homicides. Does it happen? Yes. Is it, beyond tragic when it happens? These people didn't even know each other.
Yeah.
Yes, it's absolutely tragic. But 9 times out of 10, the decedent is going to know the person or have come in contact with them at the gym, at the convenience store, the gas station, the grocery store, somewhere in the community.
Starbucks.
May not know them, but knows of them. Yeah. But, obviously there are serial offenders that do roam, and hunt in the United States, and they have a particular thing they're looking for. They don't always know their victims. So a lot of times that is stranger on stranger crime. Not always, but it can be. So, yeah, psychopaths have their own objectives for how they're going to benefit from murder.
Yet another reason to isolate from everybody. But I'm never going to Starbucks or the gym again.
Yeah, I like quarantine myself.
I'll save money on both ends.
There you go.
I literally could continue. I joked that we were going to talk for 3 hours. I could probably do that easily. But as we start wrapping it up, for nothing else, for my own curiosity, can you talk about the toughest crime scene to have to recreate, whether it was physically or using your methodology? One where you were just kind of like, all right, even with all my talents and expertise, this is a tough one.
I actually have to say that it was the very first one I ever worked, because it's funny because when I was young, when we're all young, we get all this training, we get all this education, and then, we think we're ready. We think, okay, I can do this. And
I got this. I got this by the horns.
Yes. And so then I was sent to my first scene and just stood there and just stared in silence.
What do I do with this?
I was like, There's blood everywhere. There's bullets. Okay, give me a minute. Like I thought I was just gonna like roll in there and know what I was doing and come out like like, oh yeah, I did this, I did that. No, that is not what happened. That is not what happened at all. So that was the most difficult one for me. It was the very first one out by myself, because I didn't know where to start.
Yeah.
I had I mean, literally at that point.
You didn't have a mentor or a partner or somebody that could.
This was the one after the mentorship. This was the one that I got sent to after the 100-hour internship. All of it. I went out there, and it was layers. And when there's layers of injury to victims, you have overlapping bloodstain patterns many times. You have bullet holes in different places and some holes that don't go with that scene because people shoot stuff anyway other times. And so like you have to figure all of that out, and it's a very fluid situation. So like I have to say the very first scene that I worked in the private sector, probably back in 2003, was the hardest one for me. After that, it got easier. The Whitmire case here in North Carolina, Kristen Karen Furr was the victim's name. She was beaten to death by Edwin Whitmire, who is serving a life sentence. He beat her just with his fists, but it moved through their living room in a way that I could see how the blood was showing me and telling me how it moved. But then every blow had to be reconstructed.
Yeah.
So it took me 4 days to reconstruct the bloodstains in that scene. And then he drug her into the bathroom. And so there were bloodstains going to the bathroom. Then there were bloodstains in the bathroom because that's where she actually died. He strangled her with pressed the shower curtain rod onto her throat. So there were multiple levels of overlapping injury in multiple places in that crime scene. And it literally took me days to reconstruct all the blood. In the end, of all the blows that I had reconstructed with different poles, like different, each pole was a different blow. And that was when I was using strings.
That's a lot of yarn.
Oh my God, it was ridiculous. And so like I'm pulling them all back, and my boss, the DA, is like, "Are you done?" I'm like, "No, I'm not done." I'm not done. And it ended up that Whitmire went on the run. He drove from North Carolina up to New York, then went all the way down to Florida, and then went all the way like back into Georgia. We had a bolo out on him, and he was arrested. And eventually when he decided to go ahead and give his statement, it turned out that the way I had arranged, the way that I thought the initial assault location and the second assault location, I had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It actually was 2, 1, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So I had the first two backwards.
Are you saying you got something wrong, Doc? I find that hard to believe.
No, I did, Ken. I did. I got it wrong. I had them switched. And so when I read his statement, I said, "Oh," and then I was like, "I get it now." But the blood, it overlapped to the point where I literally mixed them up, and it didn't matter. I mean, he beat her to death one way or the other.
Right.
But for me and the science of it, it mattered to me. Is there a way that I could learn from that, so that I get it right? But you're talking about like 10, 15 blows in a row around a room and then drug into the kitchen. So for me, yes, I did have those switched, but looking at the blood, there wasn't a way to determine one from the other. It was you just couldn't tell. And I did the best that I could, and had them off by a foot. Instead of him assaulting her here, he assaulted her here, literally.
Yeah.
I mean, it was literally a matter of feet. It was from the door of the living room to the edge of the couch of the living room, which was within 2 feet of it. So it still was a very strong reconstruction. It did take days, and it did help in that case, resolve that case to give answers to everyone of how this happened. Because, they never tell you everything. The defendant is never going to tell you everything. Plus, they're going to lie, to self-preserve at some level, even if they're confessing. Except one of our serial killers here who confessed and then asked for the death penalty. And we can't let you plead to the death penalty.
Yeah.
So he got multiple life sentences. But in my career, that was the only defendant I've ever had that actually wanted to plea to the death penalty. And, he's serving multiple life sentences as well.
Sure.
So, yeah.
Well, very, very interesting.
Thank you.
I could talk to you for 4 days, but that would be a lot more boring for you than reconstructing a scene for 4 days. But I learned a ton for our audience out there that also want to learn a ton from you, whether it's to find your book, have you in a program.
I do 2 webinars every month.
Exactly.
I do two webinars every month.
How can they best find you?
You can go to laurapetler.com, and that has a lot of information on there about what I do as a practitioner. And then we have our website for Laura Petler and Associates, which is lpateam.com. That will take you into the space of what we do casework wise. And then it also gives you a link to our school. We actually have our very own school here at LPA, the LPA International Forensics Institute. It's a school of forensic criminology. So it has very unique classes like Introduction to Suicidology or Investigating Staged Suicide with Firearms, things that are pretty unique. And then I do 2 webinars a month. The first webinar of the month is always forensic criminology. So it combines physical evidence, behavior, and sociology. And then the second webinar that I do every month is on something crime scene reconstruction related. So it's either a bloodstain reconstruction or a shooting reconstruction that I do like during the webinar, like literally sitting here, like I'm rebuilding things like, for the attendees. We have a new podcast coming out. I'm the co-host of a podcast called Life After Happy Face with Melissa Moore, who was the crime correspondent who I was with for the 4 seasons that I was on the Dr. Oz show as the forensic criminologist. She was the crime correspondent during those 4 seasons, seasons 8, 9, 10, and 11. And she is the daughter of Keith Jesperson, the Happy Face serial killer, and he's serving 9 life sentences. And Melissa did a podcast called Happy Face where she talked all about her experience as the daughter of being raised by a serial killer. And now she has a new podcast coming out of which I'm the co-host called Life After Happy Face. Should come out probably the end of April. And then in the future, coming up soon, we have LPA's new podcast coming out called The Murder Room, and it will be coming out sometime probably 2021, maybe early 2022. So yeah, there's a lot going on. That's the easiest way to find me.
No wonder you don't cook. You don't have any time. I'm wondering if you even sleep.
No, I do sleep. No, sleeping is very important. Yeah, sleeping is very important. But my social media handle is at Dr. Laura Petler, DRLAURAPETTLER. And we're on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram.
Got it. Well, I really truly and sincerely appreciate with everything you got going on that you were able to make a little bit of time for us, Doc. I really appreciate you being on the show.
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. And thank you to all of you who have either watched or listened to this episode of Public Safety Talk Radio.
Thank you.
And we'll be back with you
I
in a
really
week.
appreciate the invitation.
My pleasure.
Public Safety Talk Radio is produced by the POCUA. The POCUA is a consortium of financial institutions serving law enforcement as well as other first responders and public safety professionals. To learn more about our association and to find one of our credit unions or service providers near you, go to www.policecreditunions.com. And always remember, if you aren't working with one of our POCUA credit unions, you're just banking with an institution that just so happens to serve first responders. As a public safety professional, you and your family deserve better. Find a POCUA credit union today.